All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Have a really, really special guest today to talk about a specific topic that I think will be very valuable for a very specific group of agents, mostly team leaders, broker owners, or anybody in a recruiting position in the real estate space or really in any business space, because we have an executive expert recruiter today on the podcast. He has worked for, just kind of list off his resume. He's worked for companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo. Most of them in their startup stages, as their recruiter or executive recruiter to help them get up and going. He's actually positioned a lot of the startup founding team of Google as well. So very impressive resume for sure today. But without further ado, I want to bring on my guest, Bill Donahue. Bill, welcome.
Hi, Kobe. Welcome. Thanks for having me. And
Oh,
by the way, Microsoft was not a startup when I worked with them. Neither was Amazon. Just to be clear. Yeah, they were both grown companies.
Right. So yeah, so that makes the resume even more impressive in that case. So but yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show because of your background and because I'm kind of in a recruiting position as well. So just for me personally, I'm really interested to kind of get your take on your experience here and what your experience was like kind of positioning talent and finding talent and what you did. So just kind of for like really quick background for our audience here, how did you kind of get started in that space, and what was kind of the deal there where you got into recruiting in the first place?
Yeah, good question. I haven't got that question in a long time. So I was actually recruited into the recruiting business. I was recruited for one of their clients, and I was interviewing for some sales positions. And the firm I was interviewing with, which was a top-notch sales recruiting firm, said, "Hey, yeah, get into the recruiting business." And they just twisted my arm for about a week, and I finally joined them. And it was a great decision. Never looked back. I went from selling. I started basically recruiting salespeople, and that didn't do that very long. And I moved into the technical side and the executive side. And yeah, it was a fun run. I did it for about almost 17 years straight, and it was a great run. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so that's actually brings up an interesting point, because really I think a lot of our listeners are real estate agents or team leaders, and they're looking to recruit, salespeople, right? So what was that like to be in a position where you're recruiting people who are, they're almost like recruiters themselves. And you said that you mentioned
Yeah.
you were recruited as a recruiter by a recruiter. So how does that kind of work? Because I'm sure it's a lot different than just recruiting like an employee or like a staff member.
Well, I was recruited. I was interviewing with a recruiting firm, and they were sending me out, having me interview with their clients.
Right.
And they said, "Hey, why don't you join our industry?" I didn't know anything about the recruiting industry at the time. I never heard the term headhunter. I really didn't know much about corporate recruiters. I was very young, right? I was 22 or 23 years old, kind of new to the business world. And they're saying, "Hey, we got this great role. It's 100% commission, but you're gonna love it." And I said, "Okay." So I jumped in with both feet, and it's fun. But when you're recruiting salespeople, if you specifically salespeople, no matter who you're recruiting, it really doesn't really change the kind of person or the position you're recruiting for. This fundamentals are basically the same, even when they change a little bit in some respects, but the basics are kind of the same, which is you have to get to know the person a little bit. You have to build a relationship first with the individual, and you really have to take the time to find out what's that person looking for. What do they have now? What do they like about what they have? What don't they like about what they have? It's a very intimate, personable business. And the stronger the relationship you have with that person, the more they're going to open up to you. And if they don't open up to you, you don't really have an avenue to say, "Hey, here's what I have that might be of interest to you." So you really have to develop a personal relationship as deep as possible before you can really move forward, or actually also in the process of moving forward, prior to be able to say, "Here's what the opportunity is that we have that might be of interest to you." That's really key.
Right. Yeah. So what I'm getting at is what I'm hearing is definitely, developing a relationship with the individual is the most important part of recruiting, right? That's the most
Yeah,
important part, is developing an individual relationship.
I believe it is. Yeah, developing a relationship.
Right. And that's where I think recruiting is kind of like different kind of a sales process, right? It's in a way sales, but it's very personal, and it's very deep on a level. And I mean, would you agree with that, or would you any like critique that that observation?
That is very deep.
Right.
Yeah,
That I think it's a very deep level of sales, right? Because it's you're selling a different kind of product where it's not necessarily a transactional type of sale, right? You're getting somebody to join a group, or you're getting somebody to join a cause. So it would be more than just, hey, this can provide you with the specific value, and then the transaction is over. So that's I
yeah.
guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, you're totally right on the money. They're joining a cause. They're giving, in most cases, like in my case, in the technical recruiting world, like in Silicon Valley and other technical places, same would go true for finance and other disciplines. The the A players out there are always working, so you're never dealing with people who are looking for work. I would
Right.
say probably 95, maybe 90, literally 90, probably 98% of everyone I ever placed, like one of my clients, was happily employed. They've been working at IBM for 30 years, or they're working at, Hewlett Packard for 25 years. So these are not people that are hitting the streets. There was no resumes out there. We never ran any ads. So you have to connect with the person. Like I said, you have to find out they're going to leave something. They have to believe in what they're going to, right? So in that respect, it is very deep, right?
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because once you get to understand what someone's situation is, what you're selling, if you're a recruiter, you're kind of in a sales position. It's an intangible, and you either have something that fits their lifestyle and what they want to do and their goals and their objectives, or you don't. You can't change it. So if my client is ABC Technology Company, and the person I'm speaking to is at XYZ Technology Company, it's pretty simple to analyze the two situations. What's the growth factor at one, what's it at the other, what's the upside, the downside, the risk, and there's a multitude of factors, right? At the end of the day, you're sizing up the ability to succeed, right? And at what level. But you either have the right situation for them or you don't. And the same would be true for recruiting. And I haven't done a lot of recruiting for real estate agents, right? But EXP has grown extremely, extremely fast over the last what 10 years now, or at least since
Yeah.
2016 they've been taking off. And it's a pretty simple formula. They're talking to people. I know this from you and others that I've read watched videos and so on. The people that are joining EXP are in the same boat. They're with Keller Williams and Compass and a lot of great brokerages. They've done very well. They were entrenched. They were probably, in most cases, were not looking to leave. And they're smart people. They're not going to leave unless the situation was going to somehow better their life, and that would be defined by themselves. So that's a principle that goes across all recruiting, I'd say.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's very important to know that, right? So I think
Yeah.
in our in real estate, we call it like know the model. If you were going to recruit to your brokerage or your team, you have to understand what the value it is that you can provide to an agent in order to be able to articulate that. So
Yeah.
I think that's where we would say know the model is understand what the value is, and then who would it be that can actually benefit from making a move over.
Yeah. 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 Basically, if you want to sum it up really simple, find out what someone's looking for, and you either have it or you don't. If you have
Right.
it, they're in. You either do or you don't. But first, you got to find out what it is. What are you looking for? Right? What is it that really is going to meet your objectives and your goals and your family and where you want to go? And if you have it, it's the close is not that difficult because they will see it.
Yeah. And yeah, I like that. I like that you have that approach, and it's being confirmed as well, because we always say like you should never put somebody in like a headlock, or wrench
Yeah.
somebody's arm to get them to join you,
Yeah.
right? It either
Yeah.
works or it doesn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's interesting because as a recruiter in the recruiting world, you're measured on the success of the person you place sometimes years after they've been there. So, it's not a short-term transaction. So if I'm doing a search for a startup company and Kleiner Perkins or some venture capitalist firm just invested, 25, $30 million in that firm, the person they're hiring is a franchise player, right? They're looking for, in my case, I placed a lot of people who ran all of technology, so all of engineering, anything technical. Very often technology companies are founded by people with a sales or marketing background, and they got a great plan, they know the market, but they don't know how to build a product. So you're hiring a franchise player, and you need to make sure that person is there 2, 3, 4 years from now. So it's really fundamentally critical that you understand who they are and what they're looking for right up front. and then you're in good shape for the long term.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you brought up, actually, because I think for agents specifically in the real estate space, a lot of people just recruit, like they're mass recruiters, right? They're recruiting agents as if they were staffing a company, and they would just
Yeah,
go after like, so there's this really popular strategy. And I'm not immune to it. I've used this. I've actually taught this, where you just go to new agents who just got their license, and you would try to reach as many of those people as you possibly can to recruit them over to your team or company. Now, there's a good strategy, but the potential issue with that is, like you said, you know, a lot of times recruiting, especially, from an agent standpoint, the broker, the team leader are making commissions directly off of the agent's performance, right? If the agents are not performing, then, you're not necessarily wasting your time, but really from a monetary standpoint, you are, right? So if the agent's not
yeah,
performing and they're not being retained, then you have basically wasted your time with that potential recruit, if you will. So from that, from that point of view, I think it's very important to think of it almost like the way that, you've been recruiting people for, a lot of startups and different companies as well. It's like, does this person have potential to, you know make this company better, or make this team better in the next 2, 4, or even longer years to come?
yeah. I mean, the goal is not to hire. The goal in recruiting is not to get somebody hired. That is not
Mhm.
that is the ultimate goal, but the real goal is to solve a problem and to add to the organization someone that can bring value, right? So when you're bringing value, then if the person you hire brings value, then you've succeeded. If they don't bring value, then like you said, you wasted that person's time, you wasted your own time, and may not have been a good fit to begin with. So kind of goes back to what are they looking for? And I always put the responsibility for that on the recruiter themselves, because there are people out there that you will recruit and you'll talk to, and they haven't really thought through some of the issues that are relevant to making a job change or a career change. And people sometimes will make a change based on factors that are maybe half-baked and just not relevant all the time. And so it's the responsibility of the recruiter to say, okay, what are you looking for? Where do you want to be? How can we help you get to where you are? And how can you help us build our team? And both have to be in sync. So the recruiter needs to be the person to say, okay, yeah, am I talking to someone who's going to make value here, or do I just trying to make a hire for the sake of making the numbers look good?
Right. That's really good. That's a really good distinction, right? It's not, the point is not to just get somebody placed, it's to
Right.
add value to the organization.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah, and just kind of like on that note, so for your background in, placing a lot of like high value talent for companies, they're clearly not looking for like any average Joe, right? We just kind of covered that. So in that case, what are some things that you would use to identify a talent? Because like you said, like a talent who is really good at what they do might not be the best fit for this specific company. So like what are some things that you've used to identify talent, or have you kind of identified, talent even before they were, very exceptional, kind of in that way as well, to identify talent before they even, effectively become talent?
Yeah, that's a good question. Identify talent before they become talent.
Right.
It's a culture fit. So really, it's more subjective than objective. So I'll give you an example. Let's just say you're recruiting for you own a large brokerage, you have 500 real estate agents, and you're bringing in a manager, maybe to manage one of your biggest offices. Back in the days when agents were still going into the office, so on and so forth. You can look at that agent's resume on paper and say, this person has done everything where you're looking for somebody to do. They basically checked off all the boxes. They've sold, they've managed, they've hired, they brought on new agents, they've trained. They look great on paper. So that's kind of the starting point. So the starting point is they have to fit on paper, but from there on out, it's all subjective. Do they interface well with the other leaders? Do they have the same energy as what everybody else has? I mean, do they really have the same get up and go? Do they have the same passion for what we want to do? There's all these intangibles, and you only find those out by really spending time with the person, just talking to the person. In my business, I would spend many hours with my candidates, my finalists, right? Just to get to know them a little bit. And they would spend, a huge amount of time with the board of directors and my executive staff, right, before we hired them. And so it really comes down to that personality fit and cultural fit above probably everything else. And
Right.
that would be true. That would be true for superstars, or at least that people aren't quite proven yet, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It comes down to that. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And do you think that has And I think it does, but do you think it has more to do with well, that has a larger factor in play when it comes to retention as well? If this is a good culture fit, there's two identical people with the same resume. One's a better fit with the actual team, the other not so much. Um, that has to do with, even if this person who's a better fit culturally has a little bit less, skill sets, will they be like, will they actually perform better for the group?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think sometimes that's the case if they have the right drive and determination and not quite the skill sets. They really are on fire for the mission. So if it's a technology company and someone is really passionate about what you're building, so you're building a new widget that's not on the market anywhere in the world today, and this person just loves that vision, they bought into it, they may not have all the skills. Yeah, that person might work. More times than not in the technology world, you're looking for people that have both. But yeah, you could absolutely do that. Yeah, if someone doesn't quite have all the skills, if they're willing to roll up their sleeves and learn, then that's a big part of it, for sure. Yeah,
Right.
the scenario you just gave works better as you go down the food chain. So if it's a more junior person, or maybe it's middle management, not senior management, they don't have quite the skills, but they have everything else. You're more likely to hire that person.
Got it.
But as you go a little bit higher up, you need a broader set of skills in addition to the other factors, actually.
That's actually pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what it is, but like in my mind, it kind of worked backwards.
Yeah.
Because I think like for a more senior position, they're more in a leadership role. So like I guess like in my mind, it just worked out. If somebody was more in a leadership role, they kind of have to be more flexible, and they might have to learn new skill sets or possess more like soft skills, if you will, than somebody who is just kind of being hired for their specific talent or for their specific one skill set and the way what they can accomplish in the company.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm talking about the soft skills. It's the
Okay.
soft skills that have to be there first. That's like a priority. The technical stuff is, a little bit movable depending on the situation.
Got
Because
it.
the leadership and soft skills is the must have.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then the cultural fit.
Yeah. That
So you're right.
makes
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are some recruiting situations that are a little bit different than that, though. So, for example, if I had another company that we had another firm and we got acquired by one of the largest staffing companies in the world, and we were a boutique staffing company. So I ran my headhunting business, but my other business we had about 100 contractors, 50 or more employees, 50 W-2, and those were transactional contractors, mostly contractors. So they would have a 3, 6, maybe 9 months. Sometimes they go 2 years on a contract. Hiring those kind of people is more, how much money are you looking for? When can you start? What are your skills? Right? It's like a hired gun.
Right.
In those situations, you don't have to go as deep as what we've been talking about. So there are some exceptions to these rules.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And so kind of going back, because this brings up an interesting point. So you mentioned a lot of the people that you were placing kind of early on in what you did, they were very well they're doing very well in their previous company, right? So they had no intention to look for a new position, if you will. So in that case, what was the approach, right? Because they weren't looking, right? So a lot of times for me personally, a lot of the agents that I've been able to bring onto my team were actively looking for a change, and more specifically, they were actively looking into our team. So it kind of was a not to like diminish myself, but like it's almost like an easy sell. But in your case, right, you're actively reaching out to these people, and you're almost like pulling them out from a good position and putting them in a potentially better position. So what was the approach? What was the open to that?
Well, first of all, before I answer that question, you have to recognize too that even people who are otherwise happily employed and they don't realize they're not looking for something else, they're like, I'm great, don't call me. I love
Right.
this job, I'm not leaving. If you were to sit down with most people that can say that for an hour or two and you have something else to talk to them about, you probably can uncover a couple of things in your discussion that they will say, yeah, well, there's this part I don't really care for, and there's that part I don't really care for that part either. So generally speaking, there's something in there that is not working. No one has a perfect situation, right? But the way I would approach is it's a very direct approach. So our approach is always, here's who I am, here's why I'm calling, here's the opportunity. It was, you have, like I mentioned, you have to build that relationship, but you only have a few minutes to begin with, or maybe an hour sometimes, to say, all right, here's what we're talking about. So it's a very direct approach. I think the approach that would not work, and probably in any scenario, is kind of beating around the bush and, not being upfront about your objective. Professionals don't like, they're busy and they just want to know why are you calling? Why are you approaching me? So I think being transparent upfront is critical. Now, when you're a headhunter, it's real easy. So if I'm Bill Donahue calling somebody in Silicon Valley, well, after a long time, people know who I am, right? So they're like, oh, Bill Donahue's calling me. So they know why I'm calling them. But if I'm calling somebody, and I did this as well, on the East Coast or out of the country or something who doesn't know my name, I tell them right away, here's why I'm calling, here's the situation. And I think it's the same thing with agents. Agents, they want to be taken at face value and they want to take you at face value. And so tell me why you're calling. And it's just the best approach. You don't want to waste anybody's time.
Right.
So
absolutely. I agree with that. And I think
Yeah.
that's where because it's almost like what's it called? If you beat around the bush too much, it can almost be interpreted as like bait and switch, right? Like you get somebody to coffee and then
right, bait and switch. There you go.
Right. And you definitely don't want to do that because that just ruins your entire integrity or reputation. If you do bait and switch somebody, which will be even worse than if you were just direct with somebody. Even if you don't do a good job, at least they can respect that you were honest with them. And in this day and age, I don't that it's kind of rare almost. So but yeah, that's very interesting. So when you would call these people and you would start conversations with them, was there already a pre-existing relationship? I'm assuming there's not, right? So there would just be, was it more of a volume game? Because if they just say, nope, don't call me again, was there any follow-up to that, or how did that work?
That's a good question. So we had a rule of thumb in our recruiting business. I taught this, I learned this from the person who taught me in recruiting, which is for every search you do, we should talk to 50% of the people we should speak with are people we've never spoken to before.
Right.
And 50% of the people we talk to are people we have spoken to before. The idea is you want to continually expand your network. Now, if you're in a certain niche and you've been in that niche for a long time, trying to find 50% of people that you don't know, you've never spoken to, gets pretty challenging. So like in my case, I had a research staff that would constantly come up with new names and people from all these places just so I could try to hit that 50% mark.
Right.
But you have to do both because you have to remember that. And so if you call someone and they say, no, I'm out, I would never take anybody off the list, really. So I literally would virtually never stop calling someone who I thought was an A player that could fit into one of my clients. And I've talked to guys who have told me no for 10 years in a row that I've placed. So I never take no for an answer long term, but short term, you have to recognize, if you're calling for someone to make a change in the next 6 months, obviously you have to understand their situation. You have to listen kind of to their reasons why they're not interested. And if you can't if their reasons for not leaving are stronger than your reasons for, hey, here's why it might be something to look at, then you kind of back off, right? You're not gonna twist it. You're not gonna beat a dead horse. And sometimes it's just self-evident. Sometimes it's self-evident. Like for example, financial matters. If someone says, and this could apply to an agent as well, but if someone's vested in stock, so let's say you're vested in 4 million, in 6 months I vested in $4 million worth of stock as an example, or some high number. Well, they're probably gonna hold off, right? And moving till that point in time. Same as an agent. I got 40 things in escrow. Hold on, I'm not leaving yet, right? But that person probably will still leave when the timing is right. It's always a matter. Timing is just crucial. Sure.
That's a great point. Timing, right? So I think what's being taught, like for agents, just in sales, right? In real estate sales, it's the follow-up so important. It's not because of any other reason. It's really just because you're trying to match up your timing with their timing, and that's the most important part. Is that you're trying to match the time, and somebody might not be ready to sell today, but they could be 6 months from now, and then the way that you would do that is basically you will be the first person that they hear from when they are ready to sell. So that's the same way for recruiting as well. So like who is the first person they hear from when they are ready to move? If it's not you, it's probably somebody else. Right?
Yeah, that's right. That's very true. Yeah, the follow-up is crucial. You have to absolutely stay in touch with them. And those follow-ups, every time you follow up with somebody, you may not always speak to them. Maybe a text, or maybe an email. Mm-hmm. Maybe a brief conversation, maybe a voicemail, but you're still building a slight relationship, a slight rapport. You're moving that rapport forward just a little bit in all those follow-ups, whether there's been contact or not. You're still moving that rapport forward because they know who you are, they know what you're doing, you're still in the game. And it's kind of like, I hear this a lot from people that sell real estate, like listing house, staying in contact with their potential customers so
Right.
that they're aware of who you are when they want to list or buy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's I think it fits really well, right? For people to just be able to keep up with timing, and I think that's the hardest part as well for a lot of people, either in a sales position or a recruiting position, is they just don't have the discipline or consistency to follow up when the timing is right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think people get a little gun shy too. If you're talking to somebody, if you're trying to recruit someone, you got this big hitter you want to recruit, or maybe someone that's new in the discipline or new agent or whatever.
right.
And they're like, hey, I'm not interested. I'm not going anywhere. They just shut you down. You
Yeah.
just can't take it. You can't take it personally. I would never take it personally because they could have shut down anybody that day. The next day they may say, hey, I'm all ears. They might cut them on a bad day. So don't take rejection personally.
Right. And that's another good point as well, because I think I see that a lot with agents that, or, with people recruiting agents as well, is that they get gun shy, right? When they get told no a couple of times, they don't want to ask anymore. And especially they don't want to ask again. Right. So, that's, that's one of the things. Like the person that gets told no once and they ask again, maybe at a better time, that's the person who's going to, bring them over to their team. If everything else checks out. Or, from a
Yeah.
sales side, the person who follows up, they're going to get the listing as well. So
Right. Right.
yeah, having that ability,
Absolutely.
it's very important, I think. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just the ability, it's you have to have the right systems in place to enable your follow-up. That's pretty
Right.
important. That's pretty standard today, though. I mean, almost everybody has a CRM. It's pretty easy to track, and put dates to follow up with people. So that's kind of, recruiting A1, pretty simple.
Right. Yeah, and kind of like on that note, like what would you say is the frequency? Does it vary depending on like levels of interest, or is there a specific frequency for timing purposes that you think will be the best for like following up and just re-engaging conversations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's based on the level of interest. It kind of comes down to how much you know about what did you learn about their current situation. So, if you're talking to someone and they don't tell you anything about their situation, it's kind of hard for you to judge when to follow up. But if they give you
Right.
an idea what's going on in their life, right? You kind of learn a little bit about what's happening in their life and what's next and what's the next couple of years look like. That will kind of give you an indication on when you should probably follow up, right?
Right.
They will kind of tell you in so many words, hey, here's kind of my timing, right? So I would always base my follow-up based on the information I have from them. Now, if they don't give you any information, I follow up with them depending on the situation, on a fairly regular basis.
Okay.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah. So would that be more like weekly, like a weekly follow-up, or more like bi-weekly to month?
So to put it in the context of back in my recruiting days, if if I know who you are and I know your background, I know a little bit about you, and you said no to opportunity A, I will call you for every single opportunity that comes up if I think you're a fit for it. And that includes the one you might have said no to a week ago, unless you had some absolute obstacles, like I mentioned before, like you're investing in something. So unless you gave me something
Right.
that was virtually an objective that I'm not going to overcome, I'll call you the next week and say, hey, I know we just talked. And I know you just told me X, Y, Z, and you can't leave for all these reasons, but let me just tell you about this. And I've placed multitudes of people that way. So
Wow.
yeah, I would do that. I would both of those.
Right. Just by sheer persistence and will alone. That has
Well, yeah, yeah.
right.
Now, I guess if you're dealing with agents, though, your opportunity is not changing.
Right.
So if it's the same opportunity, so that basically is gonna probably show you, hey, here's what my follow-up should be based on what they told me.
Right.
And yeah, but I think you said earlier, if you're not following up, and this has happened to every recruiter in the world, you're gonna call your prospect and they're gonna already have joined someone else, right? They're gonna be gone.
Right.
That's the worst feeling, right? You forgot to call someone for a certain job, you call them, oh, he already left, he's down on Google already. I'm like, okay, right, so yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I guess that brings up another good point. And I kind of want to get kind of see if that this is the case. So it sounds like from what you've said, or maybe we're just examples trying to match it up to what's relevant to real estate, but it sounds like when you were recruiting for certain companies, you would not be the sole exclusive recruiter for them. They would hire a couple people to help them.
No, actually, no, I would be the sole recruiter,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I said he's already at Google, that was a bad example. So in my searches, I was the only one with that assignment. So we were what's called a retained search firm.
Mhm.
So they paid us up front a big chunk of our fee to find a person. So it was like an exclusive right to sell in listings,
Right.
right? We get the exclusive right to sell, the right to place that person. So there are a few very, very rare instances where a company would hire 2 recruiters for the same position at those levels. Very rare. That'd be like when General Motors needed a CEO, for example.
Mhm.
They would hire, say, Russell Reynolds and Korn Ferry, 2 different headhunters, only because they want to make sure they can go into every single company out there, and they don't want to be limited to the clients that Korn Ferry, for example, could not call because they couldn't call their own clients. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
So, right. So, but that's very rare. That really only happens at the CEO level for really large companies. Other than that, it's all exclusive. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because I was wondering because it will bring up another good a good scenario, because I think for a lot of real estate recruiting, they're either from the same company, recruiting to the same company, or their teams are structured very similarly, and it's really kind of just like who gets to you first, or who gets to you most. Because you're right, exactly right with that. It's like the model doesn't really change, as often as as an opportunity would in the corporate world.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
right. Yeah. So kind of back on the topic of follow up. So when you were reaching back out to the potential candidates, right? So what would it be very direct, trying to get to the conversation every single time you followed up, or as the relationship kind of grew, you could potentially offer them some type of value in their life, or value in their specific situation, where it might not have to do a lot with the actual recruiting opportunity, but it was just another way to advance the relationship and advance the conversation.
Most of the time it's pretty direct. And
Okay.
but if you're talking to the same people, so if you're talking to a lot of real estate agents and you're trying to recruit some, the other reason you call the same group of people would be for referrals.
Right.
So if I'm calling Kobe all the time, hey Kobe, are you interested in knowing? I said, great, who do you know? So I may have that who do you know conversation more than I have the conversation about, hey Kobe, are you interested in looking at this opportunity? So you're constantly networking with that same group. And so the same thing would probably hold true with agents, I would imagine. Good agents know other agents.
Yep.
Right. So hey, who do you know out there that's maybe not too happy with their brokerage firm would be the analogy. But I would spend time with them. We'd have people that well, I'd have lunch with them, occasionally. I was a technical advisor to some companies, so I'd get to know them on some side stuff, see them at conferences, and there's some other stuff, but most of it's either direct recruiting or asking for referrals.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. So just get to the point, right? Get to the They don't want their time to be wasted. But if the relationship was there, you would obviously not turn that down, just to kind of get the business rolling.
Yeah. There's a point in time in which for some people, if the relationship is not there, it's very difficult to recruit them.
Right.
It's done. You have to do it. You have to be able to recruit people you don't know. That's a given. But after you've known someone for a long time, you've had multiple conversations, they know you, they trust you, they know who all your clients are, who you've placed in the past, and so on and so forth. It just makes life a little bit easier, because then they can open up and, grab a beer and say, here's the situation, and, just kind of let their hair down a little bit.
Right. Yeah. And it opens up to other potential opportunities as well, because you're working with multiple clients, in that sense, multiple companies, for our listeners out there. That you're their executive, or you're the recruiter for, so you could place them in maybe in a different opportunity than they had originally thought was the best fit for them.
Yeah absolutely.
Right. Yeah, so that does make a lot of sense, and I think that's one part that for agents, people tend to miss, is if you have because a lot of people, I think, they get too aggressive on the recruiting side, and I think for agents you could be a little bit more relationship based, because a lot of times, agents are kind of looking around, and they like to network. I think real estate agents, very big network type of industry. So and it gets them to open up a little bit more, and it gets them to kind of let what's going on. It's easier to join a friend than it is to join just a company.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And everything that's important is very often the person joining the company, whoever the recruit is, whether it's in, I'm sure it's true in real estate, but it's certainly true in a lot of other areas, is the better relationship the recruiter has with the candidate, the better chance of the client attracting them. Believe it or not. So no matter how good the opportunity is, so you could be representing the best situation in the world. You could be the best brokerage, could be the best financial company or technology company. The person joining, if they have a really good relationship with the person representing the company, the headhunter, you have a much better chance of attracting that person to the company. It's funny how that works. So the people the better you get to know them, I know I mentioned this earlier, but the better you get to know them, it also gives you more pull strength to get them to join your client at the end. So that's a given in that business.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. The relationship, it's a very strong pull.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. So if you're an agent, for example, and you have you've been doing tons of deals for 30 years, you probably have a lot of relationships with a lot of other agents,
right.
right? Having been on one side of
Yep.
that transaction, right? So that's a big step forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think like one last thing that I would kind of want to get your take on is the retention issue, because real estate itself is it's just an attrition based business. Agents just drop out of
Yeah,
the industry left and right, right? And then they bounce
yeah,
around different brokerages like ping pong balls,
yeah,
as well. So
yeah, yeah.
for attrition, does it, and it sounds like it does, it comes from just doing the work up front. And if you're recruiting the right people and you're painting the right picture and it's a good fit up front, they're less likely to leave? Or would you say there's something that can be done in the back end of a company to retain a talent, even if it got off not to like maybe like the best to start, but they were doing they're changing things or doing something additional in the behind the scenes, and maybe you might not know that because you were just kind of front end recruiting, but what would you say to that? And if a company wanted you to kind of come in and not just recruit, but hopefully have that talent be retained as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think what you're asking is how do you retain talent? What kind of things do you do to retain talent?
Right. Yeah. So would it be more kind of like doing recruiting the right way and you're just recruiting the right people, or could you potentially open up a wider net and then just do more, cater your own business more towards those people to retain them?
I think so. I think the retention is engagement, right?
Right.
So retention and engagement kind of go hand in hand. Once someone's on board, they need to engage,
Mhm.
and they need to actively stay
Right.
engaged. And I think a lot of that is on the client or on the person that's been doing
Right.
the recruiting.
Yeah.
It's their responsibility to engage the new person. Now some new people don't need any of that. They're in. They don't need you to help them engage, right? They figured it out already, and they're 100 miles an hour from day one. But
Yeah.
other people do need you to pull them in and engage them. Say, hey, here's how we engage. This is
Right.
what we do. This is what we're going to do next. Here's where we're going forward. And both of those scenarios are very common, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense, because I think like for a lot of agents, right? You don't know the balance between like how much should you be handholding them or how much should you kind of leave them to their own, because agents are their own
Yeah,
like their own entrepreneurs, right? They're all run their own business. It's like
yeah,
what's too much micromanaging, and like what's
yeah,
being just engaging enough.
yeah. But I think there's an answer to that. And
Okay.
here's the answer.
Yeah.
So if you understand what someone's looking for, your job is to help them get that, right? So what are
Right.
you looking for? Why are you making this move? Why are you coming here? Or why are you going there? Whatever the case might be. So once you understand that criteria, you're kind of getting permission to handhold them or to pull them. You have to kind of get that permission up front. What are your goals? What do you want to do? Why are you here? Great, I'm here to help you. And it's the same thing in the corporate world, matter of fact. There's a lot of that. So if you're someone's joining a company as the vice president of engineering, and they really want to be a CEO someday, they want to help be groomed to be more broad and become a CEO. So they want you to engage them. They're telling you up front, hey, I want to go to these meetings, I want to go to those meetings. And I think probably the same is true for an agent. If you understand where someone wants to go and what it is that you have that can help them get there, then they're giving you their permission to engage. It could be a superstar, or it could be a rookie. Either way, they're going to need some help. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, you can ask for, you can offer your services and you can
Right.
help them move forward, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a really good answer. Getting the permission up front
Yeah,
knowing what their eventual goal is, so that
yeah.
you can point them to the right direction. So that was very valuable. And I mean, I learned a lot just from this past, 45 minutes, an hour here, from you on recruiting. I think it confirmed a lot of stuff that, I've learned from
Yeah.
real estate recruiting in general. And just, really quickly before I let you go here. So you've worked with a lot, you mentioned you've worked with Google kind of like they're right during their startup. So just as much as you can disclose, how was that experience?
It was challenging. It was fun. The founders of Google, Larry and Sergey, are really brilliant guys, and the board of directors there they're a very demanding board of directors. I'd worked with a couple of them before, which is how I got the search. So it was fun. Yeah, it was a 6-month process for the first search we did. We placed their first senior vice president of engineering operations, and we placed the next guy. I think he ran all revenue generation for their once they had revenue for their search
Right.
product. So it was a very engaging process, and it was fun. You always learn from smart people, right?
Right.
It's like iron sharpens iron, and I learned a lot from both of those guys. Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
fun process.
Yeah.
They're very interesting guys, very smart. Uh, the three things they told me, they believe it or not, back in those days, I was the hot commodity, so they were twisting my arm to help them. Right. So
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I just did all these other big searches and right. So
Right.
but when I left that office that day, after I hear the pitch of here's what they were already in business, but
Mhm.
I was very impressed. I said, these guys are absolutely going somewhere. And so, it was important that I choose the right clients, because all of my searches, in addition to my fee, I were equity based. I got equity in all my
Mhm.
clients. So, and I have plenty of stock wallpaper that amounted to nothing. So it was important that I pick the right client. So I ask a million questions to my clients before I bring them on, right? They're interviewing me on, well, they weren't even interviewing me actually, but I'm always interviewing them.
Right.
So, and that's a good point for recruiting even agents, right? Is a good agent, a really good agent, a really good hire is always the person who asks the most questions.
Mhm.
And if they're not asking the right questions, you need to try to get those right questions out of them. If someone's just not asking good questions and they're just like, okay, I'm going to join willy-nilly thinking, they're not thinking through the process, then they may not be the right person.
Right. That's actually a really good point. If they ask the right questions, that means they're also thinking about what this could benefit for them and how they can apply this in their own business, or in your case, in their own position as well.
Yeah, yeah. The harder the questions, the better.
Yeah.
Really.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, awesome, Bill. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I want to respect your time, so I'm gonna let you get back to it. But just one, for our listeners out there, who are wanting more information from you, kind of want to check out what you're doing in real estate. So full disclosure, Bill is a real estate agent now, doing really well. So for our listeners out there, kind of wanting to know more about what you do, and learn more about you and some of the things you got coming up, what are some of the best ways that they can kind of reach out to you or kind of find you on social media?
My website has my contact information, donahuegroup.net.
Mhm.
Or you can just text me, right? And my cell phone's on there. Text me if you have any questions on recruiting. We'd love to chat with you and talk to you about it. Absolutely.
Awesome, Bill. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll leave all the information down below. But yeah, I'm gonna respect time. Let you get back to it. Is there any last thing you will kind of want to leave the audience with before I let you go?
No, it was great chatting with you. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yep. You too, Bill. Appreciate it.